So, this is going to be an odd one, and I'm going to have to try and be careful about how I talk about this. But there is an aspect that feels like it is rapidly taking over the entire discourse around the movie Wonder Woman 1984, and that is the subject that is frequently being described as rape, and whether or not the film features rape, and whether or not the film is in some way being rape apologetic. So there's a couple of reasons why I want to do a video on this. The first is that this whole element I really didn't address in my original review video. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that the main element that is leading to this entire conversation, as far as actual impact on the story and relevance to anything going on, is so minor that it just wasn't something that occurred to me to mention when I was talking unscripted about that film. The other thing is, I hadn't really started to grapple with the implications of it yet, as is evidenced by the fact that I had that little insert card acknowledging it, even though I didn't talk about it. So I'm going to do my best to try and frame how the conversation, at least as I am seeing it, seems to be going and evolving, try and explain all sides involved, and then give my own take on it. I don't want anyone to think that I am trying to say I have the definitive take on this, that my voice should supersede anyone else's. But this is becoming so predominant in discussions of the movie, I kind of feel like I need to say something. So there are a couple of things at play here. The primary issue, and there are some side issues, and I'll touch on them in a moment because I actually want to get those out of the way. But the primary thing that all of this revolves around has to do with the way in which, and spoilers, by the way, for Wonder Woman 1984. Not actually massive spoilers, because everything that I'm going to talk about in specific is established within the first half of the film. So I'm not going that heavy. This isn't like ending spoilers, but there are spoilers. But this largely revolves around the way in which Steve Trevor is brought back, something that we already knew was going to happen from the early trailers. Because if you haven't seen the movie, Steve doesn't suddenly just reappear in modern times. He basically takes over, his mind and soul, I guess, basically take over the body of a man in the 1980s. Somebody with his own life, with an apartment, with clothes that Steve wears. Now, the reason I didn't really bring this up in my review is because ultimately that has almost no impact on the story as it progresses. It has almost no impact on how the characters behave, and it has really zero impact on the function of the narrative. It gets a minor callback towards the end of the film, but largely goes unacknowledged, which may actually be part of the problem. But again, I'll kind of come back to that as well. There's another aspect that is not the centerpiece of this argument, but contributes to the sense of the film not dealing with these kinds of issues well. And that has to do with the character of Barbara, who becomes the villain Cheetah. Again, I don't think that in and of itself is really much of a spoiler. But she becomes more powerful and starts to become more powerful over the course of the film. Now, early on, she is accosted verbally and physically by basically a strange man while she's walking, I think home at that point, because I think she's walking from work, not to work. It doesn't matter. It's dark. She's walking through a park. A drunk man tries to, compliment her and then gets physically touchy with her. He assaults her. He doesn't beat her, but it's assault. That kind of unwanted contact is assault. Let's be very clear about that. And when that happens initially, she is saved by Diana. Now, later on, after Barbara starts to feel her own power, she encounters that man again, and I think kills him. She beats him really, really badly. And when he has that final landing in the middle of the street, it is ragdoll. He may not be dead. It's possible he's not dead. Now, that scene in a vacuum, for my take, I think largely plays as intended, which is her anger and her lashing out at definitely at this man in specific, feels valid and feels justified, but the degree to which she takes it and the amount of pleasure she has, not in doing justice, but in exerting violent power in and of itself, that is meant to make you feel conflicted about her as a character and as a villain. At least that's my read on the scene. And in a vacuum, I think it largely works as intended. The problem is it doesn't exist in a vacuum. Nothing does. And in the context of the other stuff that I'm about to spend much more time talking about, it muddies waters further and gives an overall what is this film doing vibe when it comes to issues of physical consent and possible retribution toward it. The very harsh reading on it, which is not a reading I share, but is a reading I've seen, is that it's basically saying it's wrong to deal with a sexual assault predator. And I don't think that is the message of the movie. I don't even think that functions as an unintended message. But if you wanted to give a harsh reading, it's not impossible to have that be your takeaway. So that's the first thing. Now, the main thing, coming back to Steve, the issue of the fact that this body is not his body, that is where the conversations about whether or not the film features and apologizes and justifies rape comes in. Because basically, anytime Diana and Steve have sexually intimate contact, whether it be full-on sex or a kiss, that is happening to the body of someone who has not consented to this. Now, there's been some splitting of hairs, including by me in my latest live stream, about how far things actually go, because the film itself doesn't feature a sex scene. And it is possible to they absolutely make out, they absolutely kiss, and they definitely wake up next to each other, but it's not done in a way that you definitively have to read it as they had sex. It could have been cuddling. Honestly, if you wanted to believe that it was, there's nothing in the film that says that wasn't the case. And I've seen that element kind of derail the conversation about, well, did they have sex? The thing is, whether or not they had sex is not really the point. Although I think the belief that they do is part of the reason why the word rape is getting tossed around. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons why. Whereas other people are saying you shouldn't say rape because they didn't have actual intercourse. But let's be clear. Regardless of the level that Diana and Steve had physical intimacy, there is absolutely a major consent issue going on here. Because even if all they did was make out, that's still something that this man, whose body Steve is occupying, did not consent to and is really kind of not okay. Now, I can't prove how this got into the movie. However, having talked it through, specifically with Jessie Gender, she had a pretty good speculation as to how it would have ended up, and it makes sense to me with my understanding of how movies, especially on this scale, get made, which is that what it feels like is that the entire body swap takeover thing is something that came from an earlier draft of the script. The movie went through reshoots, most movies do. And somewhere along the line, whether it be at the initial scripting phase, whether it be during shooting, whether it be during reshoots, at some point, this entire element probably had more highlight and was featured more. And whether or not that means they dealt with the issue of consent, I obviously don't know that. But the thing is, in the movie, it's weird that it's even there. Because as I said, the fact that Steve's in another man's body actually never comes up. I had kind of assumed the instant it was introduced, it was going to feed into Steve's resolution, because somebody's going to have to bring up the fact that you're in a stolen body, dude. You can't keep it. It's never brought up. That element never comes up at all, which to me feels like it had more weight at some point in the course of the movie. They trimmed out other aspects of it and either didn't think through the implications of the snippets of it that remained, Or it would have required reshoots of so much of the movie. Like, it probably would have had to have included reshoots of basically all of Steve's initial stuff. Maybe that would have been too extensive for them to get away with, and they couldn't excise it completely. Either way, we're left with snippets that feel like they were part of a story that they partially cut but didn't fully. But that's just an explanation of how we got here. Regardless of how we got here, the element is still a problem. And honestly, let's take it a step further. It's a problem of consent even if they never did so much as kiss. Because Steve and Diana go into dangerous situations with a body that Steve has no claim to. Even if we take all of the sexual elements off the table, they are endangering someone who did not agree and did not consent and has been robbed of bodily autonomy and is being put in physical, possibly life-threatening danger. Again, that's not really okay, but could have been handled if it was addressed somewhere, but because the movie never does address it, it becomes a genuine problem for both the characters and the narrative. The fact that neither the characters nor the film itself acknowledge any of this is a problem, and it really does feel like the way that it comes across, regardless of how we got here, is that it feels like a complete failure to acknowledge the wrong done to this man whose body Steve is using. So that's the heart of the issue. Now, I personally don't feel that calling it a movie with a rape scene, or calling either the film, the filmmakers, the actors, or the writers rape apologists, I'm not going to say you're wrong if that's the position you've taken. Here's why I'm not going to take that position. And it's not because of the hair splitting about how much they did or didn't do anything. But for me, it has much more to do with going that level of hyperbolic is honestly it's muddying a discussion that's worth having anyways. And what I mean by that is when you start saying, well, therefore it's rape. And I get why people do. Because there are plenty of things, there are plenty of assaults that are short of physical penetration that honestly, it's the same robbing of bodily autonomy. It is the same sort of act. It is the same sort of violation and should be considered with the same kind of severity. So I get it. I get why people are leaping there. The problem for me becomes, as I've already seen and as I mentioned, I'm watching the discussion devolve into hair splitting over what does or doesn't qualify as rape. So I feel like using the word causes this side argument that kind of misses the point that is there regardless of how we classify it, which is robbing someone of bodily autonomy and removing their ability to consent and failing to acknowledge that in any way, shape, or form is not good. That is not good, regardless of whether you call it rape. And I feel like that's a conversation that you can have without having to elevate it to the level of labeling it that, which to me, it feels, not by all people who are doing it, but it feels by some people like an attempt to just use the most hyperbolic phrases to, honestly, to get attention, whether it be for themselves or whether it be to the issue that is in the movie. Like, there's no question that there's a problem around this in this movie. But I feel that taking it to that level in the discourse is actually derailing the conversation that could be happening. And I feel like I've seen that a bit already. Again, I'm not trying to say that anyone who has labeled it that or feels that it is appropriate to label that is somehow wrong or is at fault or anything like that. Please don't have that be your takeaway. But that's the reason why I personally am not going to label it that way. But I'm not going to judge those who are. There's another element at play that I also feel is not being taken into account into the conversation. This is kind of a back and forth that happened in my own comment section, which is that I've seen comparisons to characters like Kilgrave from Daredevil or the Borg, who also rob people of either their mental or bodily autonomy and overwrite them, which is basically what Steve does with this guy. And those have been accepted as sexual assault and or rape metaphors. If not by design, definitely they can be applied that way. So why wouldn't we apply this one the same way? And I think the issue there is one of intent and agency, because someone like Kilgrave knows he is overwriting someone's free will and ability to consent. The Borg know they are erasing someone's identity. They have their justifications for why they do it, but they know that they're doing that. Steve doesn't choose to come back at all. He definitely doesn't choose to come back in another person's body. And Diana making what she thought was an idle statement in wishing him, because at that point she didn't even know what the stone did. So it's not even like she wanted him back so much and said to hell with the consequences. She didn't know that was gonna happen. One could argue that Steve himself is in a way a victim, because he also had no agency and no say in what's going on. Not a victim of the same scale and same level as this man who I don't even think gets a name, but he did not do this to this guy. This was done to him in the same way that it happened to this man. Neither of them had say. And Diana definitely did not have intent or even knowledge that this could possibly happen. Which is another reason that I feel like making it analogous to rape or to other things that have been used as metaphorical rape feels somewhat disingenuous, because there is an issue of intent and there is a lack of self-reflection, again, from the characters, from the narrative, and possibly from the creators as well. And again, to come back and underline as hard as I can, there is a problem. This is not good. The fact that a man, and whether it was a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. Like I keep saying man, it doesn't matter that it's a man, but that's what it was. That a man has his choices and his say in his own body taken away from him, and neither the characters nor the film acknowledge that this even really happened, much less that it is a bad thing. That is not good. And if you want to make an argument that it has a contribution towards rape culture, in the sense of not giving proper weight to the robbing of bodily autonomy, okay, I'm actually prepared to say that yes, it contributes to that same cultural issue. But to call the film itself rape apologetic, or to say that Diane and Steve raped this man, to me, I don't feel comfortable taking it to that level, though I do see why others do. It's messy, I think, is the ultimate thing. And again, I very strongly feel, like I would bet money, that this is an issue of revisions, and things got changed as they were shooting or in post-production, and things got trimmed or streamlined or removed or inserted that caused this problem. There's nothing to me that indicates this was done on purpose. This is an accident. It's a very regrettable one with very nasty implications. That's my understanding and current position. My position may evolve as things go forward, I don't know. But that's where I am right now on the issue and the question and the discussion of whether or not there is rape in Wonder Woman 84. I know this is a charged topic, but I'm still going to say whatever your thoughts are. Drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. Let's do so civilly. There's going to be a lot of heated emotions around this topic, regardless of what you think of the movie. So if people need to vent, let them vent, but please do not issue personal attacks against me, the creators of the film, or other commenters. Don't do that. And even though, I try and keep more relaxed around here, this is heavy subject matter. I know that. It's okay to be heated. Just don't let that turn into venom that you are spitting at specific individuals. Please. Not in my comments. So that having been said, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's the usual stuff. I, of course, have a Patreon. It is how I make my living, and it's what covers my bills. Even if you're not able to support that, like, share, subscribe. Those help me out as well. But you also, really, you don't have to do any of it. Despite the heaviness of this particular topic, I do try and keep a relaxed attitude around here. So you can come on back the next time you need a break.